Hi, thank you so much for making time and coming to my talk today. This is my first in-person games conference since the before times, so it's really exciting to be in a room full of people, but forgive me if I get overexcited. And also because you're all wearing masks, I need you to emote with your whole body instead of just your face. Okay, that's it. Lots of people do a great job. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so this is planning complex projects remotely. On reflection, I think that this title is very funny because when I started thinking about the different projects that I've worked on over the years, they're all complex. So if you can just remove complex, it's just planning projects remotely. We can assume that all games are complex. So hi, I'm Ali. I've been working in games for 9 years now. For 7 of those years, I've been producing games, and I really like big room planning. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I've been the participant in big room planning on multiple projects over the years. Most recently at Mighty Kingdom, I was responsible for the design and implementation of an adapted version of big room planning, which was quite successful, and we did it entirely remotely. I never met most of the people that I did it with. I met someone from Mighty Kingdom today for the first time, Melissa, who I've never met in real life, so that was exciting. So in the next 30 minutes, I'm just going to kind of try and tell you about how we did that, what we learned from it, and hopefully there'll be something valuable for you that you can take away and use with your teams. So what is big room planning? So it's sometimes called program increment planning, which just sounds incredibly boring. Quarterly planning, it's called all kinds of things. It has its origins in SAFe, which is the Scaled Agile Framework, if you're familiar with that. And it's basically used to plan a program increment. I just see blank stares from everybody. So a program increment is like in the SAFe world, is kind of to the agile release train. And there's not going to be this much jargon as we go on, I promise. But to the agile release train, it's sort of the equivalent of what a sprint is, or the increment is to a Scrum team. And that's the end of me using those words. So I'm not going to teach you how to do big room planning by the sort of SAFe book. This is what the SAFe book looks like, so we're not going to do that. I'm just going to teach you about what I've done. We're good, yeah. What I've done, what's worked for me, and I'm hoping that there'll be something valuable in there for you. In the simplest of terms, big room planning is just getting everybody together to talk about your next big thing and figure out how we're going to do that. Does that sound like something you need to know? Okay, great. Who is big room planning for? I'm hoping that it's for you. As I said, like with SAFe, it's typically designed for large, complex projects with lots of teams. So that's what the Agile Release Train is. It's lots of teams working together to deliver something. But I see value in this kind of thinking and this kind of process for projects of lots of different sizes. Obviously, you would scale up and down different parts of this to suit your team's needs and what's relevant to you. So what I'm going to do today is try and explain it as a series of components. And you can hopefully see different types of value in those different components and drop them into your planning cycle as you see fit. So yeah, our big room planning is really good for establishing alignment or maintaining alignment, which I think we all know is like incredibly valuable in making games. If we're not all on the same page, things go awry very quickly. Establishing buy-in from your team and fostering kind of a collaborative planning atmosphere. So this is all about like, how do we get all the smart people on our team, and instead of telling them what the plan is, establish a way that we can harvest all of their brain juice and put it in the soup. That is the game. We're all on board with the brain juice soup. Okay, good, wonderful. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about doing things remotely, because that's in the title of the talk. And I did write the whole talk and realize I didn't talk about doing it remotely. So now we're going to talk about that. So how do you take big room planning and put it online? I'm going to give you sort of the top I don't know how many it is, 5 things I think that I learned from doing it remotely versus doing it in person. And the first one is having a clear and specific run sheet of everything you plan to do during big room planning that everybody on the team can access before, during, and for some reason after the event. This sounds boring. I cannot stress enough how important this is. When you don't have everybody in a room together, when everyone's in a room, you can kind of be like, oh, come over here, or like jump on that table, or re-explain things to someone. But when you're doing things remotely, you don't always have that connection with somebody. They might be zoning out in their own space, or they didn't listen, or something's going on with their kids, or like their cat knocked over their coffee. Like anything can happen and you're not aware of it. So you need to make that information clear and available throughout the whole process. It makes a huge difference. Secondly, simulating the big room. So if you've ever talked to anybody who's done big room planning, like in the software world or in a different industry, or just like a traditional big room planning within games, you'll learn that one of the most valuable things that people get out of it is being together, and the feeling of being together and solving problems together, coming together and being like, okay, we have this big goal that we need to achieve. How are we all going to figure this out? There's nothing more motivating than solving problems as a team. It also means you get to see everybody's strengths, you get to see everybody at their best. You also get to see people be vulnerable and like not have answers to things and have to admit that and ask questions. That's the best part of doing big room planning. So now when you do that on the internet, that can just disappear. So I would say that simulating the big room feeling is something you need to put a lot of time into ahead of the day. So that is what I've found is really helpful is using Discord for this. Discord's great, but also better than using like Teams or Zoom calls or something like that, because in Discord you can see where everyone is, and you can kind of have that moment of like, oh, I need Ren to jump into this conversation, so I can see that she's in that channel. I'm just going to jump in and be like, hey, can you jump into this channel when you have time? Or like the teams I've worked with, we've had a little system where you can like tag somebody in the chat, be like, hey, when you have time, we're about to talk about this. I would really love your input. Can you jump in? This sounds really simple, but having a lot of clarity around this so that you can sort of simulate that like walk across the room, tap somebody on the shoulder kind of moment, that's really important. Miro, if anybody has ever spoken to me in my life in the last 3 years, you have heard about Miro and how much I love it. I think it's particularly useful for something like big room planning. I'm going to show you an abomination of a Miro board in a moment, but I think it's really great to just have this sort of space that you can create that is like, this is our home for big room planning, and it can be visual, it can have all the information you need, you can organize it into groups and that kind of thing. So designing the board as like a central place where everyone will live for big room planning is really helpful. And I put in brackets, make it nice. So the more effort you can put into making your Miro board or whatever kind of central hub you're using, like visually pleasing and a nice place to hang out. It's the same as like if you were going to have a conference, you would make sure there are enough chairs for everybody. You would make sure there's enough breathing room. You'd make sure there's jugs of water. It's just doing that in a virtual space. And lastly, understanding your key components. So I'm going to talk you through what those components are. But when you're doing anything, any kind of like complex planning process remotely, it's very important that you, the person facilitating it or the person who's part of the leadership group, really understands what are we getting out of each of the things that we're doing on this day, because things are going to go wrong. The schedule's not going to work, things are going to run long, things are not going to go to plan. And if all you have is, well, we need to tick all these boxes, it's all going to fall apart. You need to understand, why am I doing this? So that you can adapt, you can pivot, you can still get the value that you're trying to extract. So let's talk about those components. Okay, first one, prioritize backlog. You should have this anyway, but for big room planning, this is particularly important. You want to be really specific. How does the item in the backlog relate to what we're trying to plan today? How do you know if that item is done? All the sort of best practice backlog stuff. And lastly, you want to split your backlog into groups or teams. So presumably if you're doing something like big room, you have multiple teams or squads or pairs of people working towards an overall goal. So you shouldn't just take your backlog and like shake it up and then like split it into 4 groups. Every team should have a clear mission. Every team should understand why this item is in their backlog. This makes a really big difference, because just like how I said, the plan for Big Room is going to fall apart, the plan for your game is going to fall apart. It's just going to happen. It's happened on every project I've ever worked on. I'm pretty sure it's not me. Like, as far as I know, it's not me. So having a clear mission, having a clear goal for each team makes a really big difference. Like I said, you know, with your event planning or Big Room planning, when inevitably the backlog is not what you actually need to do, if the mission and the goal is still clear, people can adapt, people can adjust. So second component, feature cards, issues, whatever your team uses to clearly document what a backlog item is. So this is just like a tidy, standardized way to package up information that clearly describes, like, this is a feature that we need to do, or this is a piece of work we need to investigate, or whatever it is. It has to include documenting risks and assumptions about that work, and it has to include estimation. Even if you're a team that is a no estimation team, you should be doing the no estimation practice of, like, you know, breaking things down into a small enough component that it fits into a sprint consistently, which we don't have time to talk about, but I would love to talk about. So I'm just going to quickly show you the template that I use for feature cards. So this is what I would use with a team that maybe has like low agile maturity and like doesn't have a really established way of using, you know, like a story in Jira or something like that. This kind of helps compensate for that. This is the exact one that I used at Mighty Kingdom. So it's pretty straightforward. You have a description. This could be like a user story or whatever kind of pertinent information about what actually needs to be done and why. Risks and assumptions, so be as specific as you can. What assumptions are we making in order to plan this work? You know, inevitably you put a feature in front of a group of developers and they're like, oh, but what about this and what about that? I say that lovingly. I love it when you do that. But we do have to learn to make assumptions about things in order to size them, in order to plan them, knowing that we could be wrong. And that's fine. But let's document what those assumptions are. Estimate. I don't care what type of estimation your team does. Broad strokes is fine. Try not to get bogged down in being like really granular, really specific with your estimation. For the purposes of something like planning 3 months of work, we just want kind of a rough gut feel. And dependencies. So again, you can make guesses if needed and validate those guesses on the day, but you want to try and populate a feature card like this ahead of time. So when you go into Big Room planning, you've got a big long list of feature cards. They might not be done. There might be questions you still need to answer about them. There might be gaps in your knowledge. That's fine. But the more work you put into having a really strong backlog of something like this, it doesn't have to be this, then the better your Big Room planning is going to go. An icebox. So this is a place probably on your Miro board where you can document anything that comes up in conversation that you don't have time to cover during Big Room planning. It's really important that your icebox is not just a place that things go to die. It has to be a place that you are making a commitment as a group. We are going to follow up on this, and the best way to do that for me is to put a deadline on it. So the deadline I've used is like, this time next week, we will have at least had a discussion where we've decided what the next action is for this. Even if it's like, we've decided we need to organize a meeting. That's okay. It's not ideal, but it's okay. But making a commitment that everything that goes into the icebox is going to be actioned, very important. Cadence planner. I'm going to show you something hideous. You ready? Okay. All right. This is really ugly. This is what a cadence planner looks like. There is no way to make this beautiful. It just is what it is. So you have your sprints or whatever you're using for your chunks of time. You've got your teams or your squads or whatever you're using. And then down the bottom, you've got stuff like leave, public holidays, anything that you need to be aware of that might interrupt your planning for that phase. This is what it looks like before you start Big Room planning. So the most of the work that you're putting in is understanding what are our sprints going to be, what are our teams going to be, and what interruptions do we know that we will have? And then during big room planning, it's going to start to look like this, where people are going to start to place feature cards on different sprints, and they are going to be wrong about when they're going to get something done, what the dependency is, the order that they should do it in. They're going to be wrong. That's fine. We just want to get stuff on the board. The next step is we try and make it more right. It's never going to be 100% right. We try and make it more right. And the way that we do that, and I'm going to explain to you through the run sheet, but the way that we do that is by consulting the experts, by consulting the stakeholders. We look at, what's the priority of these items? Do they need to shift? How many things can we do in parallel? What are the dependencies? Do we need to move things to account for dependencies? And you end up with something like this. This is a really simplified version. Your version will be so ugly. It will be so ugly. I can't stress enough. It will be so ugly. That's okay. It's supposed to be. It's supposed to be messy. You are trying to map, as I said, all of that magic brain juice on your team into one big hideous table. That's fine. This doesn't have to be pretty. And it's a waste of time to try and make it pretty. Can you tell I'm speaking from experience, trying to make it pretty? Okay. Fifth component, a massive Miro board. This is the structure that I've used. It's a lot of information in one place. So I've tried to show you kind of the different sections of the board that I have created. So top left, you've got your run sheet. So as I said at the start, most important information. What are we doing? When are we doing it? Who's involved? Where do I need to go? Is there a link to the call? Is there a link to the channel? This should be here all the time. Everyone should have access to it. Secondly, who's on which team? Hopefully people know that, but if it's changed, for example, right before you're doing a team split or something like that, make that information really clear. Have links to stuff like how to join the Discord channel or something like that. Never assume that people know how to do anything. Don't quote that out of context. Thirdly, our big goals for this increment or this milestone or whatever it is that you're planning, as big and beautiful and clear and inspiring as you can make them. If you've got visuals, if you've got just a big, amazing mission statement that gets everybody riled up, this is where you put that information. Your icebox, which we've talked about, your cadence planner, which we've talked about, and your team backlogs full of your feature cards, which we've talked about. So this is where you live for bigger room planning. And then lastly, the time box. So the time box is how long are we going to spend on big room planning? This is particularly important because you could spend so long on big room planning. We've talked about lots of information, a lot of density, a lot of complexity, a lot of documentation. You could easily spend a year doing big room planning. And by the time you did that, it would be completely useless to you. So I want to advocate for making your big room planning as condensed as you can, without obviously sacrificing the health of the people you're working with. So the safe recommendation is 2 days. I've done it in 1 day and it was very exhausting. I've done it in a day and a half. It was pretty good. You got to find the mix that works for you. But I would say do not spend a week on something like big room planning, because bringing all this information together at the same place at the same time, having all of these discussions as a group at the same time, it's kind of capturing that lightning in a bottle. Everything about your game can change in 2 days' time. That's okay. It should actually. Agile rituals like this should create change. They should be instigators of change. So you want to try and condense the amount of time you're trying to capture everything that's happening on your project so that you can get that snapshot. And then that snapshot's going to change. I'm sorry. But the most important part of this is that alignment, discussion, collaboration, buy-in. It's that old sort of corny producer thing of the plan is not what's important, it's how we make the plan. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example run sheet that I've used. Before I show you this is just one way to do this. As I said, there's a million different ways you could do this. I think it works differently for different teams in different ways. So for example, you might decide that you want to spend all of day one just on like backlog refinement and team discussion, and then do all of your like mapping and dependency stuff on day two. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it. This is just what's worked for me. So having a big morning briefing, this is your inspiration session. If you remember the run sheet that I showed you on the first slide, it was like, this is how SAFE does big room planning. I think the big morning briefing goes for like basically most of the day. To me, having like somebody speak at me for like 5 hours is not the most inspiring thing to then go and plan the most complex thing possible. So I like to keep this short, tight. This is like having your game director come in and say, this is the vision for the next sort of milestone that we're planning, or having your main stakeholders come in and say, this is what we've seen from the last milestone. This is what I want to see from the next milestone. These are the things that are important. And then just having somebody like you stand up and say, just a reminder, this is what big room planning is. This is what we're doing today. So try and keep that short. I think like 90 minutes is the best that I've been able to do. And then you're going to break out into teams. So this is where if to whatever degree you've refined your backlog ahead of time, you start going through your backlog and trying to place it on the cadence planner. So if you remember, this is where I said, this is where you get everything wrong. You put it in the wrong sprint, you put the wrong priority order, that's fine. The most important thing is your team is talking about what they need to do and when they need to do it. Then those teams are going to come together and they're going to look at their dependencies between each other, and they're going to realize everything they did wrong. They're going to move stuff around, they're going to draw lines, they're going to be like, oh, maybe we need to split this task, do this de-risking thing first, move this thing later. Oh no, we forgot about optimization. Oh no, we forgot about certification, like all the stuff that you forget about. We forgot about audio. Sorry if there are audio people. And then once those people have had that conversation, they're going to switch again. So this can change depending on how many teams you have. Typically, I'm used to having like 4 or 5 squads of people, but you can have more or less whatever you need to do to cycle everyone to get to talk to everyone. That takes pretty much a whole day. And then from there, you're going to present that plan. So who are you presenting it to? I don't know. Like it could be your game director, could be your product director, it could be your main stakeholder, whoever is in charge of what gets done when at the end of the day, whoever your vision holder is, you're going to present that plan to them and they're going to go, nah, that's not enough. Or I want things in the wrong order, or I want things in the wrong order. Telling. No, like I want you to work on something sooner because I want to show a publisher build at this point, that kind of thing. And then you move stuff around again, and then all your dependencies are wrong and you need to change it again. So then there's that back and forth. Day 2, I love to just be the leads or the senior people on the project. Like I said, you don't have to do that. You could need the second day and still have your whole team involved in that conversation. That's fine. The reason I like to just have a leads day is that you can kind of really openly discuss all the fallout that comes out of big room planning, all the things that we got wrong, all the stuff we need to address, the new risks that surfaced, and you can have that really fast kind of conversation you can have when you just have your leads. And then once the leads have gone over the plan, they've adjusted all the dependencies, they've taken into consideration everything that the game director or whoever said, then they represent the plan, game director signs off on it, and then they represent the plan to the team. And the team has to give you like a vibe check. Like, are we happy with this plan? What is our confidence level that we can achieve this plan? What things are we most worried about? And you have that conversation. I've never had it happen that you represent the plan and the team says, no, we can't do it. But if that did happen, then you do it again. You extend your planning time. You look at, okay, if we have to keep moving and start development tomorrow, what slice of this can we do? This is what I mean about understanding the value that you're trying to extract from these components. If you get halfway through day 1 and you're way behind on your run sheet, I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter. What matters is, are you getting the value that you need to get out of these conversations? And if you're not, what can you do to like revisit those fundamentals, revisit the components? Okay. So that was the journey of your team through big room planning. So now I want to talk about this a different way. Let's think about the journey of a piece of work through big room planning. So this is your upstream. If you're not familiar with like upstream and downstream, it's not an MLM thing. It's like your upstream is like what you do before bigger room planning, then you have bigger room planning, and your downstream is what you do after bigger room planning. So your upstream, this is, you're generating your high level goals. So this might be your game director or whoever is saying, this is where we're going. This is what we need to get done. And then you're breaking that down into, okay, what does that actually mean? Like, what are the pieces of work that need to be done? What are the user stories? All that kind of stuff. And then hopefully you are refining that work with the team. So this is really important, is that you're taking the time to familiarize the team with those goals, with that work, before they get into the room or the digital room for bigger room planning. Because you want people to feel confident, consulted, familiar with this material. And also you want them to tell you if it's really wrong before bigger room planning, otherwise you're going to waste a lot of time. Then during bigger room planning, like we just talked about, that piece of work is discussed with the team, it's scrutinized, it's put on the planner, it's moved, it's taken off the planner, it's put back on the planner, all that stuff happens, and then any dependencies on that piece of work are mapped. And then your downstream is any risks and follow-ups that you documented about that piece of work. They're booked in, they're discussed, they're de-risked, things are mitigated. And then as the team works on that piece of work, you, producer, project manager, whoever you are, you're reviewing what's being done against that big, ugly cadence planner the team created. And it's going to be wrong. Things are going to slip. Things are going to move. Some things will take less time than you expected, hopefully. Some things will take more. New features will come in. That's okay. But what's important is that you're looking at how much change are we seeing and where is that change coming from. So keep on top of that. Okay. I love to have a slide like this that suggests that there are like secrets, like one simple trick that you can do. But this has taken me like several years of doing this to get good at it. But I do think that these are three things that are really important. So the first one is your upstream and your downstream. So like we just talked about, really understanding what does your preparation look like, what parts of your preparation are important, and what impact do they have, and making sure you're not doing too much preparation. You've got to just find the right amount that works for you. Like I said, you could spend a year doing this. So how can you figure out how to make this practical, functional, valuable, efficient? Refinement time, like I said earlier, this is about socializing the idea of the work with the team. It's about understanding like what research do they need to do ahead of time to feel confident talking about this effectively in the group. It's about finding if you're making any boldly silly assumptions about how easy something is, which is something I love to do as a producer, is like, just do this thing, just make this work, and then I'm always wrong. So refinement time saves me from that situation. And then measure. So I can't tell you exactly which metrics are important for you. Like it might be velocity for you, it might be team sentiment, it might be stakeholder satisfaction, it could be anything, but understand what metrics you want to track out of your bigger room planning, and then make sure you're staying on top of that, whether it be like weekly looking at how much is what we're doing changing from what we planned, how happy is our stakeholder. If we ask the stakeholder to tell us the goals for this milestone now, would they be the same as what they told us before bigger room planning? All that kind of stuff. So keeping on top of the metrics that are important to show progress for your project. Okay. So I'm just going to show you very quickly an example like preparation schedule for doing a 3-month big room planning. So that is, we're planning 3 months worth of work. 1 month before, you're looking at how your last milestone is going. Does it look like you're going to achieve what you wanted to achieve? You're starting to draft goals for your next milestone. 2 or 3 weeks before, you're circulating and refining that work with the team, and you're briefing everybody on what big room planning is going to be like. 1 week before, hopefully you're not doing anything about big room planning, because usually the last week of your milestone, you're just focusing on finishing that milestone. I put this in a slide and I am a liar because I have never not been working on big room planning 1 week before big room planning, but ideally you're not doing this. During big room planning, most important thing, you're generating that cadence planner. So all of the discussion, all of the being wrongness that goes into creating a cadence planner, that's what you're focusing on. You're generating your list of risks of follow-ups that you need to action. You're mapping your dependencies. And most importantly, you're hearing everyone. Your big room planning is not effective if people don't feel heard. If people don't have genuine discussion about, I'm worried about this, I disagree with this, I don't understand what this goal actually means, I can't visualize this, those are the conversations you want to have. 1 week after, you're doing something to measure the sentiment. Like, how did you feel about big room planning? Do you feel you better understand what we're trying to do? Did you think it was effective? Did you feel heard? All that kind of stuff. You're completing all your follow-ups that you generated, and all of your outcomes from big room planning are translated to however you track your work, whether that be like you're putting it in Jira, you're putting it in some kind of monstrous Excel, whatever it is that you do. And then before your next cycle starts, you're tracking, you're measuring, you're embracing the change that's going to happen. You're not freaking out if things are not going the same as your cadence planner. That's okay. You're just keeping on top of it. You keep surveying and measuring effectiveness of your plan, and you adjust your next big room planning according to feedback. So if you look at that, even though you're not spending like all of your time on this, that's still like a month and a half of preparation spread out amongst everything else you're doing for a 3-month planning period. So does that seem like crazy? No, we're all cool with that. All right, good. So it's a lot of time and it's a lot of investment, but it creates a constant cycle of discussion, alignment, refinement, disagreeing, changing things, adapting things. That's how I like to work. So that's why I think big room planning is a really effective tool to maintain all those core values throughout your development, through your planning process. That's the talk. Thanks.